In the city of Modena, in northern Italy, there is a small wooden bucket locked away inside a medieval bell tower. It is old, plain, and entirely unremarkable. And yet, this bucket became the symbol of a war. Not just a local feud, but a bloody medieval conflict between two rival city-states, Modena and Bologna. Today, the story is often treated as a joke. The war fought over a bucket. But the truth is far more interesting. Because the bucket was never really the cause of the war. It was simply the final insult in a rivalry that had been building for more than 2 centuries. To understand why thousands of people fought and died over something so absurd, we have to go back to medieval Italy. In the Middle Ages, northern Italy was divided by one of the great political struggles of Europe. On one side were the Guelphs, who supported the authority of the Pope in Rome. On the other were the Ghibellines, who supported the Holy Roman Emperor. This was not just a theological disagreement. It was a fight over who had the right to rule Christian Europe. And across Italy, city after city chose sides. Bologna became fiercely Guelph. Modena became strongly Ghibelline. The two cities sat only about 23 miles apart on the flat plains of Emilia-Romagna. That proximity turned ideological rivalry into constant violence. For generations, the cities raided each other's territory, seized castles, burned crops, and carried out reprisals along the border. By the early 1300s, tensions were worse than ever. Modena was controlled by Passerino Bonacolsi, an ambitious Ghibelline ruler allied with Emperor Louis IV. The Pope declared Bonacolsi an enemy of the Church and even granted religious indulgences to anyone who attacked him. In other words, violence against Modena had effectively become a holy cause. Then came the year 1325. During the summer, raids escalated into open devastation. Bolognese forces burned fields and ravaged Modenese territory. Other allied cities joined in. Then, in September, the strategic fortress of Monteveglio betrayed Bologna and surrendered itself to Modena. This was the real spark of the war. Bologna demanded the fortress back. Modena refused. At this point, conflict was probably unavoidable. And this is where the famous bucket enters the story. According to legend, Modenese soldiers raided Bologna and stole a wooden bucket from one of the city wells. The outraged Bolognese supposedly demanded its return, and when Modena refused, war erupted. But historians believe the truth was slightly different. The bucket was most likely taken after the fighting had already begun, a trophy seized by victorious Modenese soldiers. Still, the symbolism mattered. The refusal to return the bucket became a deliberate humiliation. And in medieval politics, humiliation could be more dangerous than military defeat itself. On the 15th of November, 1325, the two sides met at the Battle of Zappolino. The numbers looked completely one-sided. Bologna fielded around 30,000 men, along with 2,000 cavalry. Modena had only about 7,000 troops in total. The Bolognese outnumbered their enemies by more than 4 to 1. Confident in victory, Bologna spread its army across a broad front. But medieval armies were notoriously difficult to coordinate. Communication was slow. Command structures were fragmented, and huge forces often became chaotic in battle. Modena's smaller army had one major advantage: unified leadership. Passerino Bonacolsi commanded a disciplined force, that included elite German knights, some of the finest cavalry in Europe at the time. As evening approached, the Modenese launched a concentrated cavalry strike against a weak section of Bologna's line. The result was catastrophic. The Bolognese army collapsed into a rout. Thousands were killed or wounded. Modena suffered far lighter losses and won a stunning victory against overwhelming odds. And yet, despite the triumph, Modena could not capture Bologna itself. The city walls held. After months of fighting, a truce was signed in January of 1326. Territorially, very little changed. Most of the captured lands were returned. The war achieved almost nothing, except for one thing. Modena kept the bucket. And remarkably, it still has it today. The original bucket remains preserved in Modena's City Hall, while a copy hangs in the famous bell tower beside the cathedral. No treaty ever forced its return. The humiliation became permanent. But the strangest part of the story came centuries later. In 1622, a poet from Modena named Alessandro Tassoni published a work called La Secchia Rapita, the Stolen Bucket. It was not a serious historical account. It was a mock epic. Tassoni took the style of grand heroic poetry, the kind used for gods, emperors, and legendary wars, and applied it to a wooden bucket. The result was hilarious. In the poem, entire cities bargain desperately for the return of the bucket. Epic speeches are delivered over a stolen pail. Classical battle scenes become absurd comedy. The poem became enormously successful across Europe. Later, composer Antonio Salieri adapted it into an opera. And its influence even reached English literature, helping inspire Alexander Pope's famous mock epic, The Rape of the Lock. In the end, the battle faded into history, but the joke survived. And perhaps that is why the story still fascinates people today. The War of the Bucket was never truly about a bucket. It was about pride, political identity, humiliation, and the dangerous power of symbols. Two cities, already divided by generations of hatred and ideology, needed only a tiny provocation to ignite a war. The bucket was simply the final spark.